Pokemon Sword and Shield recently came out, and man, what a rocky bout that was. If you're one of the lucky few who just picked the game up on day one and were blissfully unaware about the problems it had, then I sincerely envy you. Because if you didn't hear, the Pokemon fandom has been having an absolute shitstorm about this game on Twitter and Reddit alike, which has been causing quite a divide between the truly dedicated fans that don't want to settle for mediocrity, and the people that just mindlessly enjoy whatever pig slop Nintendo throws at them. I'll say up front that the hardcores were right to be upset about certain changes, but Jesus Christ, they must have forgotten to take their mood stabilizers because they've been having a field day to an excessive degree. More on that later. I picked up Shield because all the cool kids like going with the predictable primary title, and I figured us plebs need to pick up the unpopular choice so the population of Shield owners won't reflect the current gender split in China. I'm not gonna lie, I had a pretty good time playing through Pokemon Shield. I read up pretty roughly on what to expect, and I feel like either my expectations were pretty low going into it, or the internet is just as melodramatic and bipartisan as usual, or both. Probably both. I'm going to be reviewing Pokemon Sword and Shield with the assumption that you, the dude watching this video, either already beat the game and wanted to hear a different opinion, doesn't care about Pokemon but enjoys watching my content, or had a long day and you want to write an angry paragraph about how much of a dick I am for forming my own opinion of a video game regardless of how objectively correct I am. Alright, keep it coming, no need to shove, you can all verbally abuse me in an orderly fashion! After my review of Pokemon Let's Go Eevee, I said this as a word of caution in the face of uncertainty.
I know there's a 2019 Pokemon game coming out that will apparently see a return to form, but even then I'm not sure what the future holds for everything after that. I'm holding out hope that the future Pokemon games will maintain their identities as deep, engaging RPGs and not merge too many of the elements with Pokemon Let's Go, but only time will tell. I just hope they don't forget what made their games great in favor of a more profitable, impressionable audience, because I'd hate to have to hang up my trainer hat in protest.
I don't think I predicted the future as some comments jested, but it's always a pretty disconcerting possibility to know that corporations being driven by the looming profit motive are going to chase after that cash money, often to the detriment of the hardcore fans who were there from day one, and help support the series in favor of brain-dead casuals who will lap up anything they're given with vacuous praise devoid of critical thought and inane counter-arguments like, let people enjoy things. People enjoying things isn't the problem. It's people who enjoy dog shit and wave it around like it's the fucking Sistine Chapel, and incentivize intellectual property owners to shovel out mediocrity and ruin the series for easy money. But I digress. Every Pokemon game's story is more or less a palette swap of one another, so let's quickly review. You're a trainer who's leaving home in an ambitious attempt to take home the title of champion. You choose a starter Pokemon out of 3 available options of fire, water, or grass, wandering from town to town in order to capture as many or as few Pokemon as you please, taking down the gym leaders and earning badges one by one so that you can eventually enter the final tournament. Along the way, hearing murmurs of a legendary monster that holds the key to some mysterious truth that threatens your very way of life, before eventually capturing it and forcing it to do battle against other weaker creatures, before the story ends and you're free to roam around and tie up any loose ends and collect every Pokemon you have yet to log in your Pokedex. That's the formula. That will likely always be the formula, and it's perfectly serviceable. No problem with that. The new Pokedex is interesting, and much like every other newer Pokemon game, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Obviously, this is all my subjective opinion, and you'll most likely disagree with my aesthetic preferences, even though I have the best taste. Pokemon are either cute or dumb, with very few cool new Pokemon with the exception of Cinderace, Coalossal, Centiskorch, Galarian Farfetch'd and his evolution Sirfetch'd, Grimmsnarl, Toxtricity, Galarian Rapidash, Frostmoth, Duraludon, Dragapult, Eternatus, and the 2 legendaries Zacian and Zamazenta, meaning the game has 15 new Pokemon that I enjoyed out of the total of 81 new Pokemon, which is still more than XY and Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire gave to us, but what I'm pretty thrilled about is the generous dual typing that really mixes up the meta. Dragapult is Ghost Dragon, Arctozolt is Electric Ice, Duraludon is Steel Dragon, Frostmoth is Ice Bug, Morpeko is Electric Dark, Rapidash is Psychic Fairy, Runerigus is Ghost Ground, Toxtricity is Electric Poison, Galarian Weezing is Poison Fairy, Grimmsnarl is Dark Fairy, Applin is Grass Dragon for whatever fucking reason, Coalossal is Rock Fire, Centiskorch is Fire Bug, Darmanitan in Zen mode becomes Fire Ice, which I think is super unique, Corviknight is Flying Steel, and Eternatus is Poison Dragon. I pretty much allowed Cinderace, Corviknight, and Toxtricity to carry me throughout the entire game, because everything was either weak to Flying, Electricity, Poison, or Fire because of all the Steel, Ice, and Bug double types. I like a lot of these aesthetically, even if they don't have a ton of battle viability. Copperjaw, Cursula, Alchemy, Berserker, Ice-Q, either of Applin's evolutions, and Polteageist are all pretty cute, but the main problem is that a lot of these Pokemon are simply not viable for battle even when super effective moves are considered, which I normally wouldn't care about since Smeargle exists. But since Game Freak arbitrarily decided to limit the national dex and simply make the Galarian Pokedex 400 Pokemon exactly, the inclusion of choices like Solrock, Mantine, Indeedee, Heatmore, Quillfish, Maractus, Sockthrow, Golisopod, and the countless others feel like a thoughtless slap in the face. The characters initially start off strong and just get weaker. I've seen either a truckload of contempt or a massive outpouring of support for Hop, who starts off really exuberant and ends up becoming serious and changing members of his team and questioning his goals mid-game. People have been calling it a character arc, which I guess is fair, but it also feels like they're reaching a bit. But I never really found him to be too memorable or charming. His traits consist of wanting to be the best and getting sad when he realizes he's not that good, before coming back in the end with renewed vigor and eventually bringing back his Wooloo before he realizes that he wants to help people despite still not being all that good. That's all it takes to make people over the moon about his character? Okay. I'm expecting a long YouTube comment about just how genius his story arc is once people hear me say this, but I'm sorry, I just found him to be really underwhelming. Sonia just moves the story along, explains the game mechanics to the player, and fleshes out an extremely shallow backstory of the legends of the Galar region. But if you asked me what her defining traits are, I would just cite her orange hair with cute star decorations as the most memorable thing about her. I had really high hopes for Bede, as I've been craving a mean rival for the longest time, and every new Pokemon game since Gen 3 has always had really pleasant and accommodating rivals who try to lift you up more than anything, with the exception of Gladion, of course. So when this pompous little turd showed up and started vandalizing sacred relics and talking down to you, I was really hopeful that he'd become this big endgame threat. But no, he gets disqualified for being a vandal, and then gets pardoned when the fairy-type gym leader Opal decides to invade his personal space and make him her pupil, and then comes back to compete against you as a fairy-type trainer while wearing pink and using more feminine hand gestures. I wouldn't have minded this if he fought you as his normal cocky self, realized his overconfidence resulted in his failure, and then decided to repent and take on the responsibility of a gym leader before reforming his outlook and becoming a better person. But they literally took away any chance of that when they removed him right before the final battle, where it doesn't seem like he's changed his tone whatsoever. The gym leaders were really charming. I enjoyed Raihan's appearance and intensity during fights, despite the game's insistence on making him obsessed with taking selfies. I thought Piers was a pretty memorable and charming punk rock vocalist whose inclusion was minimized by his town being one long hallway with a gym battle that wasn't grandiose enough to include a Gigantamax battle. Milo was a cutie, and that's all I have to say about him. Nessa is perfect in every way, and you can't convince me otherwise. Kabu was forgettable, and I didn't get to encounter Bede, because I bought Shield, so she was replaced by Alistair, the Ghost Shota. Opal was annoying, but it was kinda clever to have her interview you in the middle of battle as opposed to before a battle like they did in Cinnabar Island in the first generation. Melanie was clearly just bait for people that like women with thunder thighs, and holy shit did that viral marketing pay off! And Leon as the champion was slightly satisfying because he was a corny and overly stylish character the entire way through the game, and he's also pretty handsome, so that always works in a gym leader's favor. I thought it was curious that I got Melanie instead of her son Gordy, who only appears in Sword, and I can only imagine how confused other players felt when they went to an ice town surrounded by snow and ended up fighting a rock-type gym instead. It's like they want to encourage people to choose between a swole girl with big footsies and a MILF who can crush you between her thighs. The story was terribly shallow. It was the same copy-paste about unraveling the origins of the world with the legendary Pokemon being the central source of things, and an evil hidden power threatening to ruin the world. I don't have an issue with the usual narrative template being cookie-cutter per usual, but the story we got didn't feel tense or interesting or dramatic in the slightest. I could just see them checking off boxes to elongate the story. A lot of people immediately predicted that Rose was going to be the main villain, especially if they listened to his theme song and spoiled it for themselves. He just really likes satanic choir vocals! But I was honestly surprised at how half-baked the villainous twist ended up turning out. He sounds like a psychotically clingy girlfriend, and it was the most ham-fisted thing in the world. Leon, the apocalypse is happening in 100 years, and we need to stop it right now. Not now, Rose. This can wait until after the championship. All right, fucker. I'm just going to end the world today instead. And the villainous gang Team Yell is hands down the worst ones we've ever had in a Pokemon game to date. They don't have any goals or ideals, they just really like Marnie and want to support her on her way to the championship. That's it. They're like the Pokemon world's version of Twitter stans who aggressively obsess over their idol and overcompensates for their lack of a personality with a fandom. Team Skull may have been self-aware and comical, but there was at least entertainment value people could derive from them, on top of Guzma having a definite motivational shift at the end of the game. And Team Flare was endlessly vain and contrived, before being redeemed by their nefariously cool leader, Lysandra, who had his own megalomaniacal aspirations that blinded him from thinking rationally. So for Team Yell to not only have an unintimidating name, goofy unattractive appearance, aimless intentions, weak Pokemon. I mean, I know they all have weak Pokemon, but it's just one more bullet point to add to the list. And a flashy leader who ultimately becomes an ally in the endgame on top of Chairman Rose just doing a super destructive thing because he naively wanted to keep Galar bathed in light, goes against everything that makes a good villainous force in a Pokemon game, leading me to dub both of them the absolute worst Pokemon antagonists in the entire series. The Pokédex being limited to only 400 Pokemon felt reasonable at certain times, and downright stupid at others. I couldn't piece together why we needed to have Pokemon like Vespiquen and Noctowl instead of Blissey and Salamence, and other more interesting choices. And I mean, not that every Pokemon needs to be a viable competitive powerhouse or anything, but is there really a reason Bert and Ernie are in this game? Who uses these ever? By the time I finally completed my Pokédex, I felt like I did so with a handicap, because after completing previous Pokédexes, 400 just seems so small. The other controversies people have been posting about were kind of silly. Much of it stemmed from Junichi Masuda saying they had to cut most Pokemon out of the deck so they could fit in more high-quality animations, only for the models to be confirmed to be taken directly from Sun and Moon. And while I agree they shouldn't have lied about that considering how many of these were just recycled, I don't think the massive degree of social media tisming was justifiable. I don't blame Nintendo for being hesitant to delay the game after they did the same thing for Animal Crossing New Horizons and saw a massive stock drop, despite me wishing they gave it extra time to polish it up. But some of these complaints are just ridiculous. While it's true that the frame drops and overall lag experienced in the Wildlands was pretty ludicrous when connected to the internet, I was much too enamored with having an open world area with dozens of different Pokemon types frolicking in and out of the tall grass to be bothered to notice some crappy textures on a bunch of trees. And I was really confused when people chose to be upset about really petty things like certain combat moves being the same as they've always been in terms of animation. Oh, I'm sorry, was Pokemon Stadium 2 literally the only time Pokemon ever had custom moves like that? Suddenly the standard for every Pokemon game? Or are you suddenly enraged solely to fit the narrative? I know people will counter these points by saying, well, Game Freak shouldn't have lied about making higher quality animations, and yeah, that's true. But is that the only reason that people are upset about this? Or are they really just reaching to try and find as many problems as possible, no matter how small, to start a consumer boycott? Like, I legitimately saw a 4chan list of things that Nintendo won't be including in the game, and I saw the removal of berry mixing from Hoenn listed as a downside. Berry mixing. Seriously. I mean, I enjoyed that back in the day in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, and I'd love to see more utility with berries in every Pokemon game, but if you're citing that as a bad thing for this new Pokemon game in particular, you're really reaching. I also saw a lot of people shitting on the turning animation for the legendary wolf as you're about to fight him, saying that this is the premier fight for Zacian and Zamazenta, but it's literally not. This is. For people to not only be inaccurate when critiquing the game makes Nintendo fans look like a bunch of dishonest crybabies that are willing to lie about actual flaws the game has in order to convince more people to not purchase it and participate in the boycott. I enjoyed the return of character customization, including being able to put in contact lenses even if the amount of hairstyles was really limited, and the clothing choices started to get pretty samey towards the last two towns, but the EV training method is pretty annoying this time around. In the other games, you could use super training and the Pokepelago systems to either actively grind effort values, or leave them in a bin and allow them to passively accumulate stat boosts in real time while you were away from your game. This has been replaced by Pokejobs, an identical system to Pokepelago without the option to add Pokebeans to double the points received. So I opted to just grind watts from dens and spend them on the Dig Brothers before selling all of my spoils to an NPC, and using my 500,000 plus Poké dollars to buy vitamins with which to brute force my way through the most tedious part of breeding a competitive Pokemon. Assuming the RNG doesn't screw you and you end up getting a lot of high value items, you can max out a Pokemon's EV in about 2 hours or less, compared to maxing them out passively with the Pokejob system in 96 to 120 hours. So I'm kind of frustrated that they opted to cut convenient quality of life endgame breeding mechanics for no discernible reason. I also think it's annoying that the only way to get berries is to shake trees and hope you get the ones you're looking for without getting greedy with your tree shakes and having an obese squirrel dive bomb you and initiate a battle before getting away with most, if not all of them. Remember the berry farming systems in the last few 3DS games? Was there something wrong with that? Some salaryman at Game Freak woke up one day and said, well, we don't want players to be able to get one citrus berry and grow an infinite amount of them, so let's just force them to shake trees all day. Also, Poke Camp is stupid. I don't care about the curry decks or the golden cooking utensil that I can get from completing it. I care about petting my Pokemon and discovering their favorite and least favorite spots, thereby adding personality to my little monstrous buddy. Wiggling a toy in their face and playing fetch with them is inferior to feeding them cupcakes and rubbing their cute little face, as being able to physically caress, brush, and clean your Pokemon was probably the closest we've ever gotten to having real Pokemon as pets. As for the bigger parts of the game that were bad, I didn't particularly care for the online components. I don't know why they removed the multiplayer system from the last few 3DS games that let you see when your friends were online and what they were up to, and instead stuck with the one they had implemented for Let's Go, in which you use a 4-digit pin to match up with your friends and ended up getting paired with some rando who somehow guessed the same pin, despite the odds of that happening being literally 1 in 10,000. I kept trying to come up with really unguessable number combinations and pushing my friend to hurry up, like we were leaking government secrets over an encrypted network before the government taps into our transmission. Raid battles aren't the worst system, but the main way in which it falls flat is the Dynamax/Gigantamax raid battles, in which you'll interact with a den in the wild area with a big beaming red light, and it will initiate a 3-minute timer that invites 3 other people to come join. But when you're looking for groups, it can take a while to find one, namely because your friends won't always get the memo, and your feed will often lag behind and leave a number of older raid notifications behind, which will take a moment before it'll tell you that the raid is over or has already filled up. Most strangers won't join unless they see a 5-star raid, in which case the group will fill up very quickly. But if it's a 4-star or lower in the event that you're farming experience candies, then you're on your own, bitch. This is further compounded by the fact that NPC trainers will often bring questionable Pokemon like Magikarp into a fight against a super difficult boss that will almost always one-shot them, which is a problem once you realize that the battle will end after either 4 feints or 10 turns passing. What makes this more insulting is that there are exclusive Gigantamax forms of certain Pokemon that can only be encountered through the RNG raid spawns, but simply doing well against one isn't enough of a guarantee that you'll be successful, as they have a very high failure rate in which you'll throw an Ultra Ball, and the rare Pokemon will often run away anyway. This is made even more frustrating when I came back to Pokemon Shield weeks later only to realize that not a single person was joining any of my 5-star legendary raids. 99% of the time people would join me, they were names I recognized from my friends list, as it seems like that's most visible to them. But I would have liked more clarity as to how these work, along with faster notification refresh times or an auto queue system that would allow people to filter out what kinds of raids they were looking for in advance. Literally anything is better than what we got in the final product. I find it perplexing that when farming eggs, the player still has to walk back to the daycare worker in order to talk to her, say yes, receive the egg, hear her well wishes, bike in a circle, lather, rinse, repeat. Obviously, egg farming is, has, and always will be tedious to one degree or another, but considering the player already has access to their entire PC box at any time, I'm questioning why Game Freak decided against conveniently streamlining egg farming by having the daycare worker automatically send eggs to your party or having you stockpile it in a designated PC box so that you don't always have to constantly wrestle with the inventory that has you opening the menu, choosing Pokemon, pressing the right shoulder button, selecting Pokemon, moving them to your party one by one, closing out of the box, closing out of your party, closing out of your menu. The whole thing is obviously necessary to some degree, but the more time I spend breeding eggs, the more I realized I absolutely hated the UI. I find egg hatching to be a pretty cathartic experience overall, as I usually do it while I watch videos in the background, but literally the only thing I dislike about it is having to talk to that stupid NPC and zoning out before I realize that I just took out my Ditto, and now the game won't let me reverse that decision and is instead like, okay, well, do you want him to keep the Destiny Knot, or do you want to put him in your bag because this fucker's leaving and you have to pay to do it all again because you're a moron. We've officially entered the nitpicking zone, but can we talk about this annoying shit for a second? You're like, okay, cool, I got a Pokemon with the right nature and IV, so I'm gonna start breeding the next one. You talk to the worker and she's like, here you go. Do you want to take back the second one? No, I didn't mean to hit the button. I thought you were just gonna be like, thanks for paying us to inbreed your creatures. Like, as far as I'm concerned, you can fucking incarcerate Ditto in your daycare center. I never want him back. He's my pink little brothel bitch, and he has no purpose other than to overpopulate this very small continent so that I can have a slight speed advantage over my opponents. Under no circumstances will I ever want you to give him back to me. Put some shackles on that fucker. Cement him to the ground. Just never, ever ask me if I want him back, you minimum wage jockey. I haven't seen a therapist in roughly 10 years. The endgame is very limited, as after you beat the champion and take the belt, the only options available to you are to beat the tournament repeatedly to farm money and experience points, attempt the battle tower to farm BP, finish your Pokedex, finish your Curry Dex, and attempt to pursue Gigantamax Pokemon with a very low catch rate, and hunting for shiny Pokemon per usual. I don't think the endgame is as interesting or exciting as some of the other games in the series, and the post-game content dragged on for far too long, making the player fight the gym leader's out-of-control Gigantamax Pokemon Pokemon 8 separate times while fighting the obnoxiously gimmicky and forgettable Swordward and Shieldbert, who insist they're the rightful heirs to the legendary Galar heroes, asking you to prove yourself to them on multiple occasions, specifically 3 separate battles, and fighting Hop throughout the entire game before your final battle with him to the point where the game feels overplayed and stretched out. It's just so bloated with virtually no payoff. Like, dude, Hop, I get it. You want to be the best in all of the Galar region, but XP share is mandatory and I couldn't be underleveled if I tried, so just accept the fact that the universe is against you and stop trying so damn hard. You're making a fucking scene. Where the game is mostly redeemed is through the soundtrack, which, while it's mostly electronic, has a lot of pretty memorable bangers, as the kids might say. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, I talk somewhat in-depth about the music in my reviews. So if that's not your cup of tea, then just click to this time code, because I get plenty of blowback from passing rando saying, "Wow, you reviewed the soundtrack for most of this video." I will cut you, you ungrateful, freeloading little shit. We have the main theme, which is very energetic while still remaining faithful to the original motif that always made me feel hyped to play the game, more so than any of the other games in the series. The Slumbering Weald song is my personal favorite, as it sounds really relaxing and emotional, like the beginning of a monumental quest in which a young boy embarks to save the world, with strong strings spaced out to make the player reflect on the responsibility they've just taken on. It also has a B section that sounds more tense, with some obvious wolf howling, to prime the player to expect the upcoming encounter with a legendary Pokemon. Upon engaging with it, the music continues the howling motif with an incredibly slick slap bassist just spazzing out all over the place. I also thought it was kind of a neat touch to apply a low-pass filter to the music as the fog got thicker. Sonia's theme song might be one of my top 3 songs in the game, as it just has such an incredibly relaxing air about it, to the point where I thought it was the work of Marika Suzuki, who had done work for Mega Man 11, as this particular piece sounded very futuristic and lighthearted. A lot of the field music sounded particularly samey, as you might expect from more happy Pokemon tracks, but I was impressed with the music for the first town, Wedgehurst, which 45 seconds in throws in a very high-pitched synth that echoes some of the better compositional strengths of Hoenn or Unova's soundtracks. I enjoyed Hop's encounter theme that has a good bit of slap bass, which, as you can probably tell by now, is my weakness. His battle theme is nice too, just a fitting amount of levity devoid of stress or pressure to make sure new players know he's a friend rather than a foe, utilizing plenty of syncopation, saxophone, and electric guitar with minimalistic percussion and a swelling sense of optimism from start to finish. The gym leader battle music isn't too exciting to me, but I always really enjoyed after the opening swell, how the music sounded like the beginning of an EDM song before crossing into a techno-oriented melody. also kind of interesting how the Gigantamax song that plays when the gym leader pulls out their last Pokemon replaces the lead instrument from the song and swaps it out for a giant wave of cheering synchronized with whistles, even if the tedious sounding melody of said cheering gets immediately grating. The tournament battle music is particularly intense, despite being a variation on the gym leader battle music, and sounds like the audio equivalent of lasers shooting off in every direction, with a strong introduction and some pulsating synths to carry that momentum forward, despite a midsection that falls off in intensity and melody. The song that plays when you fight Hop in the championship is a minor key variation of his original theme song, to add intensity and emotional tribulation, that everything is on the line and he has to stay focused on the finish line, with the crowd going wild and cheering him on in his moment of truth. It's also a nice touch that it gets a salsa refrain with some triple claps and intermittent cheering to add a little bit of variety in the middle of the song. When fighting Eternatus, you get a fairly generic, evil-sounding piece that establishes the threat at hand with a little bit of electronic elements adding to the ominous tone. But once you and Hop use your sword and shield relics to call the wolves, a dissonant piano track begins to play before working towards a hopeful violin that transitions into a satisfying howling electric guitar that harkens back to the legendary Slumbering Weald motif before breaking into a hopeful, you can do it emotional hook that almost feels like it's attempting to appeal to Hop more than it does your character. The legendary battle theme that plays as you attempt to defeat Zacian or Zamazenta once again utilizes a rapidly sped up version of the Slumbering Weald, combined with the first battle song to remind the player of how far they've come and how accomplished they should feel about their progress. battle music is my #1 favorite song in the game, thanks once again, in part to the tasty slap bass that keeps the intensity running high, mixed with a flurry of musical layers that overwhelms the player before branching off into a satisfying simplistic electronic B section before looping back around to the beginning. All of this mixed with Bede's smug demeanor made me really want to rip him to shreds and wipe that stupid look from his face, and make him realize that he's actually a much weaker trainer than he wants to admit. And his encounter music is also quite nice, with a jazzy running bass line that reminds you that this kid is probably going places in his career, utilizing the chorus of his battle theme as a leitmotif. And lastly, Rose's encounter theme sounds like a goofy, laid-back little jingle, with some violin and synths to impress upon the player how seemingly trustworthy and down-to-earth the chairman is, with some ominous church organ notes to begin the piece, as if to... Yeah? You want to be in my video? With some ominous church organ notes to begin the piece, as if to warn the player subtly that he's the secret antagonist. His underling Oleanna seemingly defines herself solely by her role in Rose's operations, which makes it fitting that her theme song is simply a rehash of Rose's theme. But instead of appealing to Rose's lackadaisical temperament, it's transformed into an almost heroic, determined composition, as if Oleanna truly believes she's squashing a couple of bugs for the sake of the man whom she looks up to so dearly. And of course, there's the Battle Tower battle theme that was comprised by Toby Fox, who unsurprisingly did a fantastic job with a selection of sound fonts that always make his work stand out from the rest, citing his creative direction as a track full of explosive power, and saying he wanted to show the energy and passion I felt when asked to create a song for Pokemon, concluding his sentence with, "Yeah, let's get wild, baby!" There's not much to say about it aside from the fact that it features a satisfying mixture of brass and bells with a driving urgency to the tempo and backing guitar. Eventually, the song breaks into more horns and drops the percussion altogether, before bringing in the military drum snares and cutting to a rising electric guitar phrase. The The song then loops back to the beginning before progressing once more and phasing to a significantly truncated refrain, utilizing electric piano and some sustained strings that then cut back to the chorus with new instrumental choices. I can safely say that the compositional cornucopia was an absolute delight in this title. I think if it wasn't for the great tracks, my opinion of the game would have been severely diminished. But to find out that Toby Fox wrote a really great piece to top off the experience was a real treat, and I genuinely hope he becomes a mainstay for more battle tracks in the games to come. Also, for the people who think they're clever and want me to talk about Toby Fox's Mpreg Homestuck shitpost he made years ago, and mention that he snuck it into an official Nintendo game, listen to the actual portion of the song people think he referenced and compare it to the Battle Tower battle music. If you think that 2 repeating keys with similar syncopation are sufficient evidence to say he did this intentionally, then you could also make the claim that 10 notes played in decreasing pitch in any song are a tribute to Megalovania, which is just kind of simple-minded. So as believable as it is to assert that Toby Fox was trolling Nintendo without their knowledge, I'm gonna have to call poo-poo on everyone perpetuating that narrative, because as it currently stands, there's almost no similarity to claim it was an intentional homage, despite that totally being something Toby Fox would do. I doubt he would knowingly put something that potentially controversial into a song that was going to go into the newest Pokemon game, because I'm not really sure if you've seen social media over the last 10 years, but companies really hate drama, and he'd surely be jeopardizing his chances of working with Nintendo in the future if he really thought he could pull it off. So yeah, extremely unlikely. All in all, I had a decent time with Pokemon Shield, despite it being a fairly bland overall experience. A lot of the flaws with the game were somewhat overblown despite their validity, primarily because of the fanbase becoming so emotional and reactionary, but they're nevertheless in the right to be critical of the game's shortcomings. I likely had a lot more fun because I've been playing the game with my friend Wyatt Ola from the It movies, and pretty much anything is more fun with friends, so that's probably clouding my judgment ever so slightly.
You look stupid. Chase does look stupid. Thank you.
Are you kidding me? What the hell?
XXX Hollow Maria.
This game's biased and shit.
Why does it keep losing signal? Is it because the fucking Switch is getting undocked for a second?
Yeah.
I hope all future Pokemon games will remain as console games from this point on, save for the exception of perhaps a fully paid Pokemon game on mobile devices with no microtransactions, so Pokemon Go players could have another social game to sink their teeth into without cheapening the experience. But I'm really enjoying the potential prospect of a massively open-world Pokemon game more akin to the Breath of the Wild game that Nintendo fans have been dreaming of ever since that one Breath of the Wild Photoshop blessed the internet. But I doubt Game Freak will blow their load to such a degree anytime soon because it would be really difficult to top and might jeopardize the formula fans will come to expect from the series going forward. But if they ever end up going in that direction, I think it would be much more feasible to pull it off without taxing the Switch's processor by attempting to display multiple players walking around and interacting with the environment. Just keep it an isolated offline experience in bulkier areas, and relegate online play to towns, instead of trying to cram Pokemon models and NPC models in one big area with a ton of foliage and water particles. I'm hopeful the Game Freak will learn their lesson in the next installment, and in the extremely unlikely event that anyone from Game Freak is watching this, I would simply say to be more careful about what they publicly say in the future, and to keep the game in the oven for more than a year until you have all the kinks worked out.
Also, yes, I've seen the content that will be included in the upcoming DLC, but I don't think it's going to change much about the game itself. I might do a review of it if it significantly improves things, or I might not. I don't know.
See ya.